Welcome to the Remodelers on the Rise show. A lot of times when you listen to this podcast, you are hearing me interview a remodeler, hearing their story. A lot of times it's just me getting on the microphone and riffing on a topic or two. And I do have some guests from time to time, but I would say, they're working inside the remodeling industry and various things. I have is it okay if I call you unique, Kurt?
That would be perfectly fine.
Okay.
I think that's what a lot of people might call me.
Excellent. I have a unique guest today. Not only is his name Kurt Nelson, and not only is he the president and founder of a company called the Lantern Group, he's a PhD, folks. Hey, get your notes ready. We're dealing with somebody who is Dr. Nelson. And the way that we got connected was through a mutual friend of ours, Michael Anschel. A lot of you listening to the podcast has probably heard me interview Michael over the years. And Mike, I posted something in Remodelers Community, our private Facebook group. If you're not part of that, go to remodelerscommunity.com. And I said, hey, I'm looking for some guests. It's 2025. What do we got? And Michael said, you need to talk to Kurt. He is a behavioral psychologist. He can talk about things that remodelers should be thinking about, not only for you guys listening and gals listening, to get a better handle on who you're talking to when you're in the prospects and with clients, but also as you lead your team. And interestingly, Kurt, as we were talking, has a organizational psychology background, and it is something that I think my son, who is a freshman in college, might be interested in. So Thomas, if you're listening, which I know you are, because I'm going to send you a recording of this and tell you to take notes on this, because here's Kurt, a PhD in organizational psychology. This could be you someday, kid. This could be you someday. Who knows? Kurt, could you give us an introduction and tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Well, thank you, Kyle. That was a fantastic little intro there.
Right.
I'm feeling like I'm on stage. I have to represent all the organizational psychologists in the world here really well. So,
that's right.
As you mentioned, I have a background in a PhD in IO psychology, actually industrial organizational psychology. My work for the past 30 plus years has been working with organizations, mostly Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, around helping them understand why people behave the way they do. So really trying to understand their employee base, understand their customer base, but we're really looking at how do people think? How do people behave? And oftentimes what the psychology is really interesting in is that we think that they are going to behave in one way and they act in a very different way. And some of the assumptions that we make, some of the kind of nuances that we know, that we believe aren't necessarily the true thing. And so it's really interesting when you get to work with organizations and you work with the people inside those organizations to understand what is driving that behavior. And that's the basis of most of the work that we do. So.
How did you get into it? What kind of prompted you to go that direction?
Yeah, it's a fascinating...
Kyle, like I have a PhD in psychology. We're gonna have to go all the way back to when I was a little boy, and this, or maybe,
yeah, hopefully, yeah. Well, I had mother issues. It's a psychology thing. No,
yeah.
Actually, I had my MBA, and I had come up and moved up to Minnesota. After that, I got that University of Iowa.
The 20th best state in the country, by the way, folks. Minnesota. Michigan's number one.
Oh, there you go. Oh. Well, anyway, moved up to Minnesota, had that as my MBA, and started working for a company that did a lot of work around employee incentives and understanding some of that motivation behind why employees are behaving the way they're doing. How can you get salespeople to go out and do that extra call on a Friday instead of just cutting out early and going home and different pieces? And so I'd already been interested in human behavior, but that kind of really solidified that. And then I decided I'd go back, and after 5 years working for that company, I set my own little hole in the ground and said, hey, I'm going to start my own thing. And that's the short answer. I have a podcast as well. It's called Behavioral Grooves, which we talk about behavioral science things with my co-host, and then we talk with researchers. But I always get mad at our guests sometimes when you ask the time, and then they don't tell you the time, they tell you how to build the watch, and sometimes even how to mine the ore to get to the metal to build the watch. So I'll try to keep it short. I have
You're the perfect guest. You're the perfect guest so far. You're doing wonderfully. You're almost leaving me wanting to know more, which is okay. even what you said there of, I've always had an interest in human behavior. I think for a lot of people listening, even myself, I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur, and I think a lot of remodelers, especially in the remodeling industry, we're getting into remodeling because, man, we love to work with our hands. We love to dream something up and see it come to fruition. We can go into a space. You guys can go into a space and just visualize it and see it. And as you go in your remodeling business and you start to build it and you stop swinging the hammer and you're now in the office more and you're starting to hire people, what inevitably starts to happen as you work through understanding your numbers and marketing and sales, you start to quickly realize that as a business owner, leadership becomes a bigger and bigger part of your role, especially if you've got more than two people, it becomes a major aspect of your business. And even the way you said it, I don't think a lot of us listening, myself included, even use the phrase human behavior. I'm a student of human behavior. I think about why is it that we respond the way we respond and do things the way you do. So that's what I'm excited for you to kind of teach us on today. Is it's an area that for me is something I've had more and more interest in the last couple of years, and is a deep well that I know I need to continue to be a student of. So I'm excited for us to dive into it. So it's a little bit of an open canvas for you, my friend, of going, behavior science, human behavior, this idea of helping people understand more about why they do what they do. I'll give you two roads to go down. One being perhaps from the client standpoint,
Okay.
or maybe even more importantly, and not to nudge you down this road, but let's go down that road, from leading your team and leading your employees. Talk to us about kind of how you think about that and what would be helpful for us and as business owners to hear.
Yeah. Kyle, I thought it was really interesting because you said the reason that most of people get into this, right? The entrepreneur aspect of it is, I like building things. I have a vision. I see things in different aspects. One thing that you didn't say was, I'm in it for the money, right? And different pieces. And that's really, it's a fascinating piece because we often kind of equate, ownership with a lot of money or different things. And even when we're thinking about leading our employees, it's like, oh, how much do I have to pay them in various different pieces? And that's important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the monetary side of things is very important, but oftentimes we over-index on the monetary side. And that I think is really key. So there's a model. It's called the 4-Drive model. It was developed by a couple guys from Harvard, Nitin Noria, and then Paul Lawrence, back in the early 2000s when I was really starting to get into this. And it's a model of motivation that I find really easy to understand. It basically is 4 main drives it says that we are driven at work, and there are 4 main drives. Now, granted, there are a lot more than that, but if we boil it down, those are the 4 main ones. And the first one, it's real easy. It's A, B, C, D. The first one is acquire and achieve.
Well, I can even understand that, Kurt.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple thing. That's what I like it. Simple is better than complex in these things. So the first drive is really this drive to acquire and achieve. That is the monetary part. That is that aspect. But it's also achievement. There's that achievement part. So there's that aspect of, I do this better than anybody else. I get that recognition. And I think for entrepreneurs, that's oftentimes a big motivator, right? Is like, I can do this better. I'm going to be the one that's going to be, recognized in, in all the trades and different pieces as being up on a pedestal. We are the company that people want to, look out and kind of be like. So that's the first one. Now, when you're talking about your employees, that one is that's the lever that we often tend to pull. It's like, all right, how much do I have to pay these? Can I put an incentive in? Is there a bonus, some sort of thing? And again, like I said, that's important. But in the end, it's not necessarily as important as everything else.
And when you say we over-index that, meaning we just put too much focus and weight on that one versus a more balanced that you're about to teach us?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And so, too often that is what we think when we're talking about motivating or engaging people that work for us, right? Mm-hmm. Is, all right, so if I need to work them longer or if they have to do more, it's all about the pay. And that, as I said, is a part, but it is only one part of the puzzle. The B stands for bond and belong. And this is an aspect of, like, we are social creatures. I talk about this. we didn't survive as solitary creatures when we were back in the cave, right? And we were in tribes. We were social, and we are social creatures. And even that, the American ethos of that lone cowboy out on the range, always came back to the fire and other cowboys around there, and they'd tell their tales and they'd sing their songs in different pieces. So we do a lot for other people.
Could you sing one of those songs for us?
I cannot, because you would lose every single listener that you have if I started to do that.
Okay, so, carry on.
Yeah,
I thought we were about to have a moment.
I'll let you sing it if you want, though.
Nope. I only do that for paying clients, not people that are listening to this podcast for free. But you never know. As a host, I went down that rabbit hole. You might say, well, yes, I am a behavioral psychologist. I'm also an opera singer, and you might have serenaded us.
There you go.
Social creatures. Carry on.
Yeah, so we're social creatures. So we will do a lot to make sure that we stay in the kind of positive, these interactions with other people. Now, you always run into that, curmudgeon person or different pieces, and so we over-index on that. We don't really think about how much we do to just make sure that things are going good. And oftentimes that is not just with your peers, it is with your boss. And so if you're a leader and understanding that, it's not to take advantage of that, but understand that, hey, if you have a good working relationship, that's engaging, and that I'm going to be more likely to do that extra effort because I like you, because we have a positive relationship, and that I will, do it because that's what we do when we like each other. Right. So that's that one.
So what I'm hearing so far is, again, we're trying to, it's called the 4-drive model.
The 4-drive model of employee engagement. Yeah.
Of employee engagement, 4-drive model of employee engagement. So as you're listening to this and applying this, I'm even thinking as you're talking with my team members of, we have to recognize that acquire and achieve. We need to recognize our team members, and yes, that's a driver, but be careful not to over-index. Yeah. And then B, bond and belong, and recognizing that as a good leader, I need to understand that that is a drive that my team has. I need to make sure that that is part of the fabric of who we are as a company.
Exactly, and you can foster that, and so it's having those opportunities for people to get to know each other at a different level beyond just work. And so, whether that be a happy hour, whether that just be some time where you're not talking about this project or what we need to do this week, but just like, hey, let's find out a little bit about who you are and how we all kind of work together and what are those things that we like. And we all know that, and actually there's some really good research out there, that if you have what you consider a good friend at work, your likelihood to leave that company is decreased by almost half, if not more than half. So that in of itself, when you think about turnover, is one of those things. It's like, I get really upset when leaders are going, that the basketball, pool that people are doing, or, some different thing that takes 5 minutes out of somebody's day, and people are, multiply that and how much time is lost. I'm going, yeah, but it actually bonds people together. And so allowing some of those things, maybe even encourring some of those things.
When you talk about the basketball thing, you're talking about March Madness.
That pool where you put the I'm going to pick these 5 or Super Bowl bets or any of those kind of fun things, right? Those things that take it out of that work mode into a personal mode.
Yes.
And so
two things on that. One is what you were saying is a good thing for all of you listening. If you err on the side of waste of time, I'm not going to take a Friday afternoon once a quarter to bring in some food and just have some fun. Waste of time. If you're leaning towards that way, Kurt will probably echo this, and I've seen it in my coaching experience, and studies will also show that company more than likely is going to be talking about turnover, is going to be talking about longevity of team members. Recognize that there is a correlation between those two, and the bond and belong, and that we're social as a key part of that. It was interesting, the coaching call right before this, my client was talking to me about remote workers, because my 2 employees are remote. And I said, what's interesting about it is it works. At the same time, we have to be real thoughtful from a culture building and frankly, taking time just to have water cooler talk. Yeah. One other thing I'll mention, remember I said Thomas was going to be listening to this, my son. You mentioned March Madness. Let me talk a little. This will be a key if he's actually made it through the first 10 minutes. Hey, Thomas, Michigan State is going to lose to Michigan in basketball. You heard it here first. Twice this season, big talker. Let's see. We'll see if he actually listens in the first 10 minutes.
All right, there you go. If he gets beyond, and you can have that conversation and go, so who's going to win between Michigan and Michigan State?
Yeah, we grew up Michigan fans, like all-time Michigan fans, and my son goes to Michigan State. It's a bit of a problem. There's some behavioral psychology we can talk about there.
Well, I'm a alumni of Iowa, and Iowa's doing very bad this year, so I can't even.
Cool. So C of your 4-drive model, I'm interested in hearing what C is.
So we're moving on from the bond and belong into challenge and comprehend. So this is that aspect that as humans, we are naturally inquisitive, that we like variety, that there is this aspect that we want to learn, and that we're also really motivated by challenges. And if you think about your own personal life, that is one of those things that when you think about it, wow, I really realize that. I often call this my video game drive. So I'm not a big video game player, so I'm mid-50s, so Pac-Man was a big thing when I was young and different pieces. And if you think about Pac-Man or any of those games, if you get past like level 1, like you're working, you get that little ghost and eats you up in Pac-Man and all right, I get it. And finally I get past level 1 and I get to level 2. Well, if level 2 isn't any more difficult than level 1 and I can get through level 2 really easy, and then I get to level 3 and it's no more difficult, pretty soon I'm getting pretty bored. And I am not going to play that game anymore. If you see how video games are designed, it's like they level up. You get a little bit more difficult. Now, it's not enough that you can't, you don't see some progress. You don't see this aspect where, all right, I'm doing a little bit better, but I'm not quite there yet, right? That is part of that challenge part. So when we're talking about leadership, it's all about how are you challenging your team? What types of goals are you setting with them? How are they being challenged to learn something new? So if you have carpenters, all right, I have a carpenter who's 10, 15, 20 years, has that experience. They still have that drive to learn. And maybe it's something new in how things are done. Maybe it is a different way of just, working with coworkers, or, the new technology that's coming out. But don't suppress that, right? And figure out what it is that people are going to want from.
Because from a behavioral, it's like humans in general, let alone in a working environment, that's just something that's wired in us. That
hardwired. And so this idea that again, one of the big aspects of turnover is that when people feel like they're stalled, when they feel like I'm not growing, that is part of this, right? So, and again, we think about that, and I think oftentimes in many situations, it's like we go, wow, they're really good at what they do, so it should be easy for them. Well, easy isn't always the most motivating. It can be, if it's too easy, it becomes boring. It becomes plates. And so that's where you get, again, turnover can happen because things are too easy. Because I not feeling like I have any growth. I'm not expanding who I am.
Yeah.
And we don't think of employees often in that way.
Yep.
And sometimes we just discount that. And that I think is a big miss.
This might be a hypothesis, and people call it different things. A players, top performers. I've got 20 employees, and look, I don't have my favorite kids. They're all my kids, but employees, I've got my favorite employees. Would you say that, especially for the high performing employees, the A players, is this even more important for them? My hypothesis, not having read the studies, is that if you really stunt the growth or the future track or the new challenge for A players, they will get bored and they will change leadership teams and they're going to look for something else. People that are kind of mediocre, they don't really care too much about the challenge and comprehend. That's lower on their list, and they just kind of hang around, and they're happy to hang around. Do studies show that, your experience? So
I will actually push back on that second part. I will agree 100% with your first hypothesis that those A players, that top 20% of your employee base, those ones, and they are usually the ones who will find it themselves, even if you're not. So it's active. If you actively suppress it, that's bad. And if you encourage it, then you have just really made those A players even more powerful, right? And so they're going to be coming at that. So if you suppress it, that's bad. And they will be searching and be looking for other work at other places that allow them to do that. But they're going to find that themselves. That middle 60, I always like to, this is a rough, that 20-60-20 rule that I often talk with organizations
42%
about.
of statistics are all made up anyway.
Well, actually, I thought it was 74%, but that was, okay. It's, and then statistics often, are, conflicting, right? So
Fair
you can
enough.
get two different ones. But there is this 20-40 or 20-60-20 rule that I kind of use, that, you have your top 20%, then you have the big middle part, right? And those are the people that come up, they do a good job, but they're not doing that extra. They're not just getting there. And then you have that bottom 20% that, they're the ones that you end up talking to all the time, right? And most leaders spend an inordinate amount of time with the top 20% and that bottom 20%. There's some really good research out on that. Like, you're fixing the problems on the bottom 20%, and these are your top 20. They're the ones who are driving everything. And so you just want to make sure that they're doing everything, and you're talking with them and different things. And then that middle 60 kind of gets forgotten. And again, that 20% is, could be 25, could be 30, whatever it would be, but that middle is forgotten. And that is a big miss. Because if that middle 60% feels like they're being paid attention to, and feels like, hey, my leader is giving me this challenge, or, entrusting me with a little bit more, or asking my opinion on some aspects, you have just re-engaged them at a different level.
Yeah.
And this comes particularly like when you're setting goals. And I don't know enough about everybody's, individual way that they're running their business, but if they have, bonuses or incentives or different pieces, if it's individual versus team, if it's an individual one and it's only going to like the top 20%, if I'm at that 50% threshold, pretty soon that any incentive or anything like that doesn't engage me anymore, right? So you have to understand, all right, I need to stretch people, but I needs to have it where that stretch is enough that if I put the extra work in, I can achieve it.
Gotcha.
And that's a big piece of that as well.
So the second part of my hypothesis, where I was like, and then you got that section where they're just they're happy to just sit there. I think what I heard you say was, it's not necessarily the case. If you engage them and don't miss that opportunity, you're going to be surprised at how, they might never soar to the level of your top 20%, but there's a lot of room for growth if you're thoughtful and purposeful and engage with them and challenge them.
Exactly. We did some work with a large pharmaceutical company. And when we looked at that middle 60% of their sales force, we knew that if we could get 1% increase in kind of productivity from that middle 60%, it was a $150 million add to the bottom line. When you think about, obviously, a big pharmaceutical company, but again, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% increases, which are not uncommon. If you actually just put some time, energy, and focus in on that middle 60%,
improving their performance,
you can improve those. And again, your top 20%, they're also driven by that achievement piece, right? And so if somebody all of a sudden is starting to catch up to me and kind of that, they're going to be driven even further up. So you go back to that A1, and they're going to be like, I'm not going to be second place in this anymore. I'm not going to be, bottom 10, right? Anything. So you get that.
Good. Oh, and I can hear it. I can hear my listeners through my ears. They want to know what D is, Kurt. What's
D? D is the one that I think is the hardest for people to necessarily kind of grasp. And it's defend and define. And Paul Lawrence and Nitin Noria, who developed this, talked about this as we would defend our tribe when we were evolving through, caveman area. The tribe would, if there was a bear out there, if there was a saber-toothed tiger, right, you're going to circle the tribe and you're going to defend from those outside things. And so as people, we still feel that. We don't have tribes per se, but, often if you can get a good bond and belong kind of sense in your organization, a good strong culture inside of your organization, that becomes a surrogate tribe. So your company becomes a surrogate tribe. So you will defend that company. And so you will go out and kind of make sure that if you hear somebody talking negatively about that company, you can either do one of two things. You can kind of turn your back and walk away, or you can go, hey, I work there. That's not how it works at all. And so part of how you get that is, again, is just people have to feel like you're doing something that matters, right? We are meaning-seeking creatures. And so oftentimes, if we think of a job as just a job, what is the bigger thing? And if it's remodeling, it's like creating the space for people who, are going to, have a different life because of what you're able to do inside of that house. Or, if it's building a new home, it's like you're giving somebody this home that they have. And so really tie into that, really build into that sense of what you're doing, that bigger purpose. It's not, and I often talk with my large corporations, it's not about the bottom line at the end of the, oh, as a company, we made X millions or X hundred thousands of dollars. That isn't as motivating. It isn't that meaning that people are going to take. They need to latch on to something that has some internal aspect of it.
Interesting. So if I'm a remodeler, got a team of a dozen, let's say, and I'm wanting to integrate some more of this A, B, C, D, I'm wanting to kind of lean into this side of things. What are some of the tangible ways that they can start kind of entering into a little bit more thoughtfulness with this?
Yeah,
more
so
intentionality.
we can go backwards. So we'll start with D, right? And so again, D is often, I talk with leaders, is just communicate. Just communicate what you're doing. Try to find those customer stories that are really emotionally impactful and share those, right? And then as much as you can, link what that individual employee is doing with that outcome. So like the work that you did when you were project managing this really helped, achieve this outcome. And because you were responsive in the way, and because we set this up and you overcame these hurdles, look at what that did at the end result. Look at the difference that you made in this project or this work. And, try to find those moments. And I call them, it's capturing the snapshots, right? Because there are tons of different snapshots that we have throughout, our work day and different pieces. And oftentimes, if we look back on that day, they're gone, right? We forget about them. And so how do you capture those and kind of put them in an old fashioned photo album, right? That you can look back on and say, hey, remember that? That was great, really. And that brings that culture, kind of makes that again.
I mean, I heard a bunch in there. I heard bond and belong in there. I heard recognition in there. Go ahead.
Yeah. And that actually is a big piece of this too, is there's often overlap, right? That bond and belong piece kind of overlaps with the define and defend a lot. For the challenge, it is coming up with what are the things that are going to challenge? What can the people, can you give somebody some training opportunities, maybe that you wouldn't have thought of before? Can you put somebody in a new kind of maybe a little bit of a leadership role where they hadn't had that before? Or maybe they don't want that leadership role, but what can you do to challenge them? And one of the things that if you can do this, and this isn't always an easy aspect, but if you set goals are a fantastic tool of saying we need to do X by X time, right? There's lots of great research that says, goals will drive performance, even if there's no reward associated with them. It's just like, instead of, chopping down as many trees as you can, chop down 15 trees today. Oh, all right. Now I'm going to go for 15. And so set those goals. But one of the biggest things is if you can co-create those goals with your team members so that they have a say. Because if I believe that I'm putting in and have some autonomy in what my goal is, I'm going to be much more
versus Kurt, here's what I want you to do. There's a lot more buy-in the other way. That video game analogy just made all the sense in the world when we were talking about challenging. Of like, of course the second level is more difficult because I've learned it, because I've learned some of those skills. I'm able to do it. I think of that as a business owner. I think about what I'm managing right now versus what I managed 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there's no chance in the world that I would be able to juggle and do the different things and have this program and that program and manage a couple people and all that. But it's because I've learned it, and it's kind of unlocked the next challenge and the next challenge. As you were describing it, I did write down, ask your team, what do you want to be challenged by? And then the next thing you said was co-create it. What a great leadership line of just saying, who here wants to just rest on their laurels, wants to just kind of keep going, or who wants to be challenged a little bit? Yeah. I think it's here. Oh, okay, good. So what do you want to be challenged by? Yeah. Think about that. Come back to me with your thoughts. Like, that's a great way to apply some of this 4-drive model that you're talking about.
And there's always going to be, not always, I don't like using the always or never kind of components, but there's often, that one person who, if you ask that, they say, I just want to show up and do my thing. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, if they're doing a good job, that's okay. But I am always of the ilk to say, you know what, there probably is something that they want to be challenged on. They just, they haven't taken the time to think about it, or they've been burned in the past, or something has kind of put that in that position. And so if you can try to tap into some of those, even for those naysayers, for those people who might not be like raising their hand, yeah, I want to be challenged as well.
Sure.
On the bond and belong, I think we talked about some of the things already, but it's like creating those opportunities inside of the workplace or even outside to have those connections, to have that real sense of who you're working with as a person, kind of get to know them on that level. And it's not like, I don't want you to have to be like a psychologist and like getting somebody on the couch. You don't need to learn their entire back history, but find some things in common, find some aspects that as a team, the team likes to do, and make sure you allow those opportunities. As you said, one Friday a month in the afternoon, bring some food in, maybe, have some beverages and, have some time that you can just let, you're not talking work, you're doing something else.
Yep.
And those can be really powerful. And the last one, that idea of acquire and achieve, make sure you're paying people fairly and that you're doing that. That's a big piece. Fairness is an absolute, it's not a motivator, but if they feel like it is unfair, it is one of the biggest demotivators ever. And I will if people are really interested in seeing how fun fairness can be, there's a great video out, and all you have to do is Google Franz de Waal. It's FranzDewal and Capuchin Monkey. And there's a video that Franz de Waal is a researcher, primatologist, and he did this research with monkeys. It's been repeated ever since, about fairness and the difference between grapes and cucumbers in a monkey experiment. And you will laugh. It's a 3-minute thing, and you will laugh. So.
Okay. We did the ABCD. We did the DCBA. Are you able to recite the alphabet backwards, by the way?
I cannot. And if you asked me to, I would not pass that drunk test.
And I don't know why. It's kind of a stupid human trick, but ZYXWVUTSRQPONMLKJIHGFEDCBA. Why I know how to do that? Why I learned that when I was in grade school? I don't know. But I felt like that was the one opportunity I ever had to really recite it and impress people. And I feel like now I can charge more for my services because I'm not a PhD. But
you've raised up a notch on everybody who's listening. You have gone from that middle 60%. You are now up in that top 20. There you go.
Interesting.
There you go, Kyle. Wow.
And there you go.
He's amazing.
Tell me something fun about this Michael Anschel. How have you seen Michael Anschel integrate behavioral psychology into his remodeling business?
Oh, that's a really interesting.
You guys have done some winter camps together, and you've known him over the years. How have you seen him kind of live this out?
So, an interesting piece. And so, again, Michael and I've known Michael for a number of years. We were in Rotary together, became friends when we started winter camp, which was this winter excursion away to a mountain where we would do lots of developmental type things, both business but personal, as well as then get out on the mountain and use like skiing or pieces on the mountain to kind of really bring some of these lessons home. And one of the interesting pieces that we did in one of the camps was we had separated the group into 2 different groups. We had a meet for lunch out on the mountain, everybody on their skis, different pieces, and we'd set up this challenge course for them. And it was basically like you had to have a snowball, hit this target, and do some other different things like that. And one of the things that we did is we talked about framing. And this is a communication thing. And so for one of the groups, we gave them this written document, and it was all about make sure you don't cross the line when you do this. And it's really important to follow all these rules. And, if you mess up, it's going to be really bad on here, and all really negative kind of wording, all sorts of really rule bound different things. The other group, basically the same kind of outcome. Here's what we want you to do. But it was like, you have an opportunity to be thinking outside of the box, take this and really work as a team to figure out how to do this in an innovative way. And what ended up happening is obviously the team that had the negative framing versus the positive framing performed much, much worse, and very, and got angry at each other and their team and a variety of different things. And so just goes to show, again, from a behavior perspective, the power of words is really important in how you frame something. And I think Michael's taken that into his work, at least from what I've seen. So,
see, I thought you guys just, went on a ski trip and called it a business trip, but it almost sounds like you balance the two out pretty well.
We try, and I will tell you, this is you had asked a little bit about Michael at the beginning before we got on air, and me to describe him. One of the things that I described on winter camp was that he would take people to the edge, literally and figuratively speaking, of emotional and kind of personal, like pushing, like where do you want to go, but also out on the mountain and like getting them up on a double black diamond when they shouldn't necessarily be there. And he's going to push them over the edge. And I was the person who had to pull them back and say, no, Michael, we're going to take that little catwalk down and I'm going to get them down to a blue groomer. They're not going to go on the double black right now. And that, again, figuratively and other things. But I think there's power in some of that sometimes, like having somebody push you to that edge. And that's a great kind of thing too. As a leader, sometimes you want to make sure that you're not pushing people over the edge, though.
Yes, find that balance. And, I talked about at the start of this kind of being a newish topic of, I feels like I've been kind of getting my feet wet a little bit, and there's a whole deep end of behavioral psychology and kind of what we're talking about here. And I think it's a good example, and I don't want to speak for my listeners too, but I have a hunch that a lot of my listeners are kind of similar of like, I've heard about some of this stuff. I've kind of waded in. I think this is a good example of the challenge aspect of, as a leader, this is a great area of growth for a lot of us, myself included, to really dive into this and truly start to learn it, truly start to integrate it. Because all of it, the thing I loved about what you've shared here is all of it is very practical. And I think we all resonate with it, but don't really have a framework for it. Don't really have a little bit more of taking these ideas and figuring out how we actually integrate and do things with it. So that was exciting. Two things, Kurt. One, can I, and we're live, so you have to answer live, so I can hold you around the double diamond. Would you be so kind as to be a guest on the podcast again in the coming months to talk about specifically communication?
Yeah, I would love to. I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Bailey, make a note of that. He said yes.
Yes, I said yes. It's recorded.
Yes.
You have me now. I can say it's an AI fake, but it won't. Nobody will believe me.
AI. Amazing / whoo. Number, I think I have three things. So that was number one. Number two, if people wanted to listen to your podcast, if people wanted to reach out and say, hey, this guy's pretty interesting, and it sounds like he helps businesses with these types of things, and you also have a personal aspect option too. Can you tell people a little bit about kind of what you do and where they should go to find out more?
Yeah, so if you're interested to listen to me and actually much smarter people about this talk, Behavioral Grooves is the podcast that I co-host with Tim Houlihan, and you can find that on any of your pod services. We have 450 episodes out there. Have been lucky enough to talk to the leading researchers from various universities around the world. I think we have 3 Nobel laureates that we've had the lucky chance to be able to talk with, and so that's kind of fun, and you get to get some of those insights at a really deep level. If you really want to go into not just kind of, stepping your foot into the behavioral psychology and behavioral science world, you can go down there. We try to keep it fun, so it is not just boring academic speak, but it is great.
I mean, it helps that your co-host last name is Houlihan. Is that what you said?
Houlihan, yes.
I mean, it sounds fun. Sounds fun already.
Yeah, he's a good old Irish descent. And
there you go.
Pieces.
So that's the Behavioral Grooves podcast. And
that's
then
the Behavioral Grooves podcast. And then, so if you wanted to reach out, if you're a leader and you go, I have this question, I'm happy to have a talk with anybody. And so you can reach on, go out on LinkedIn and you can look up Lantern Group, or you can look me up. Kurt W. Nelson is my middle initial. And so you can do that and just reach out. And I'm happy to kind of talk with anybody about that. We also have, as part of the Lantern Group, we do most of our work with larger corporations, but we have worked with small companies as well. So, I mean, we're open to kind of helping that. But we also have a individual change subdivision of Lantern Group, which is called Behavior Shift. And that is one of those, it's personal journals that are guided that can help you, create habits and routines, help you keep your motivation up. Variety of different pieces along that. Modules about how to set goals. We talk about what are keystone goals, which is a whole nother topic we could go on and talk about. But that's at behaviorshift.shop. Or you can just go out to Amazon, and all our products are out on Amazon as well.
So that was the second thing. And I think I said originally I was going to do 2 things, and I changed it to 3, now up to 4. So number 2 is done. Number 3, Kurt, the aforementioned Thomas Hunt.
Yeah.
His mom and I say, you know what? He seems to like psychology. He seems to love talking to people and whatnot. Kurt, I would love for you to give your best pitch to my son on why he should explore behavioral psychology more.
So, for anybody that is interested...
No. I want you to speak specifically to Thomas Hunt.
Thomas, here's the thing.
Sir.
Here's the thing. You need to bring your skills as a person who likes to talk with people, but also trying to understand that, into this world where you're going to make a positive difference in many people's lives if you bring in a behavioral psychology or an organizational psychology perspective, because not only do you get to kind of maximize everybody's positive aspects, but you can help them achieve things that they never thought were possible before. So
that was good, Kurt. You nailed that. Thank you.
I tried. You put me on the spot there.
I know I did. And then you were going down the other. I said,
that was not in the notes of leading up to this.
I said, no. I don't want you to talk in general. I want you to talk to Thomas William Hunt. All right. So that was number 3. And then number 4, as we wrap up, if you were to say, all right, talking to remodelers in general, here's kind of my last best tip, or the other big thing I love to share with a company leader. Here's another thing to kind of think about. What kind of comes to your mind for that?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I always talk with leaders about is that, our brains like to fool us, right? Optical illusions, a variety of different things. And we have a number of what behavioral science has indicated we call behavioral biases, these kind of ways that our brain just kind of, does some shortcuts or takes some, elements and necessarily makes them different in how we think about things. And the one that I always find as the biggest impediment is an aspect that's called confirmation bias. This idea that if we are presented with information, we are much more likely to believe it, to see it, to actually act on it if it confirms a pre-held belief that we had. And if it's against that pre-held belief, then our brains do this mental gymnastics of discounting it, actually not even like you're reading it and it doesn't even register, which is some really fun, interesting studies that we do. Or we just find whatever little flaw is in there so that we don't have to, change our, pre-held beliefs. And so the thing is with leaders is, as much as you can, and this is really hard because this happens at a subconscious level, we don't even realize it's happening. But if you can stop, just try to tell yourself, am I just confirming my pre-held belief? Is what I'm reading, this article, is the conversation that I'm having with this employee because I already think they're a great employee, or I already think that they're slacker? What am I missing? Because my brain is pulling that kind of wool over my eyes on that. And just try to do that. And it's really hard, but if you can do it, even just a little bit, it changes the way that you show up as a leader, and you're going to be much more effective.
So when you see that in a leader and they've worked on that skill, because it probably doesn't come naturally to many people at all.
No, it is not natural at all.
When you've looked at that skill, does that translate into some of the best leaders you know?
Oh, by far. By far. And here's a trick. So there is this little trick. Actually, Michael was the one who
Michael, he's so smart.
I know, Michael.
Yeah. Carry on, Kurt.
But it's an old Japanese thing, Michael translated and so he has this old, and it's the what is 2 breaths, 7 breaths exercise. And so basically, if you're presented in a situation where you're making a decision, then it has to be made relatively quickly. Or you're having a conversation with somebody and you're feeling that emotional kind of component come up, like you're getting angry. This works with your spouse. It works with employees. It works with your kids. This is a great little trick, is take 2 breaths before you respond. That pause, it allows our brain Because again, that confirmation bias and some of the other biases that we have in our decision making are the ones that come up quickly. And even 2 breaths, which is basically a couple seconds, allows our brain to do some more deeper processing. And if we use that time to really think. And then the 7 breaths is, well, make that decision before the 7th breath is done. Don't overanalyze it, because that's the other problem that we can have. We can go too deep into, well, what about this scenario and this scenario and this scenario? And so it's 2 breaths, 7 breaths. So hold your decision and your reaction for 2 breaths, but make sure that you have it before the 7th breath is done.
Good. Yeah, and we'll have to kind of keep digging into that confirmation bias and even looking that up and watching some videos around that. The other thing I think about with that is it's just so, maybe it was just as prevalent 100 years ago, 200 years ago, but I think even more so now. We live in these silos of information. So many aspects of our lives are kind of biased towards a certain direction. I think that other than being purposeful with it, thoughtful with it, I think the other way to combat it is empathy. Yeah. If we actually put ourselves in their shoes and instead, okay, I'm not going to pass my judgment based on this, although you've earned my judgment, employee, because you've done this 17 times or whatever the case might be. If we're empathetic and we try to put ourselves in their shoes and in their mind, we are going to lead so much better. So I appreciate that last one. Kurt, this was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. It was fun being here, and looking forward to our next conversation.
See, now you can't blame the AI thing because you've committed to it multiple times.
Twice.
All
There
right.
you go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.